Hello, and welcome back to the use and abuse of Laura Endicott. This is chapter the 8th, a Forest, Scene 2. From that point on, I gradually gained in confidence that Philip and I could indeed stay on at Arlemont, at least for the time in which it might take him to secure a position in one of the colleges, which, in one of his previous letters, he had told me that his Sorbonne professors had encouraged him to do. Even I knew that the vast majority of the faculty who had tutored me did not possess the third degree. It was considered, at the time, a research degree for specialists and not necessarily for teaching faculty. That was why I reacted with astonishment, in part to cover over my resentment and, yes, fear. Contrary to Olivia's suggestion, I had not lost my fear per se, but I had learned to master it, in almost all circumstances, when he had told me he was going to Paris to pursue the doctorate. But now, after a single term, he was coming back to me. It would be a matter now of a scant few weeks, to live with me in both sin and in good faith. I told myself I could live with them both. Marriage, yes, definitely. With the Lady Miss as my bridesmaid, perhaps. Then again, perhaps not. "Shall the two of you be wed, then?" Sarah asked me over dinner the next evening. To this Olivia snorted gently and raised her glass. The girls had been taking wine with dinner each night, but I could not fail to notice, that Olivia barely drank the amount she carefully apportioned herself. She had become over the ensuing weeks all the more of a presence, more confident, more skilled, and no doubt more dangerous, even deadly, than ever she had before, and all of this personal evolution, so to speak, was utterly calculated. It made me wonder if she had now her sights upon a larger, more important target than those who had invaded her home, and with a motive correspondingly larger than personal vengeance to drive such a mission home. "I think I shall have a stroll in the forest," Olivia announced apropos of nothing. "Would you care to accompany me?" She had directed this straight at myself. My look must have betrayed me, for a faint smile flickered over her shrouded features. "It is rather late in the day, is it not? We might well have to bring lanterns." "I propose half an hour at most, until the dusk runs its course, enough to get some cool fresh air and improve our respective sleep." That seemed reasonable. For her part, Sarah had given her sister a look, which at the time I failed to interpret correctly. No, that is itself not correct. I had failed to interpret it at all. In fact, we ended up sticking to the wider gardens, their foliage and bud, their perennial qualities incipient. There was a rocky outcrop near the beginning of the ridge path, overlooking both the outer landscaping and the encroaching forest. Olivia led us to this point, and then she promptly sat down upon its apex. "This is a favorite spot of mine," she began. "I would come out here to sit as a child, or, in even terms, to stand. No doubt due to having recently been beaten, or some such thing. My face again betrayed me. You are a jewel, Laura, to be sure. Your beau is a forward-looking fellow, I trust?" "Yes, I believe him to be such a person. It is an odd combination, given that he is a student of history. Perhaps he shall understand your sense of justice better than I because of it." Olivia appeared to brush this off, yet it was not meant as a barb in any way. "I think you understand it well enough. The chief difference between you and I is that you are passive and I am active, but I do admit that action dulls the mind, and passivity affords time for a necessary reflection upon things. And more importantly, upon oneself," I added, but in lower tones, as to not seem overbearing to her, or, as many a teacher erred, to always make sure I had the final word on every topic. "Is the self here to stay, do you imagine?" I am not quite sure what you mean." "This being of ours, which we have so recently invented, the sovereign self, as the philosophers call it, it has in our time become a great, even a sacred fetish." "Surely that is redundant." I allowed myself to fall back behind my lectern. "In that the savage's fetish is by definition a sacred thing, no. I do not completely agree with our ethnographers. By the by, the very existence of savages as worthy of study is itself a fetish, just one of our own making this time. As I would suggest to you in turn that the conception of the sacred is how we describe these others' doings, not what they themselves would say." "That is wise. Yes, I can see that. I was about to say good for you, but I have just now noted that we are not in the schoolroom." I knew this to be more in line with Olivia's taste in humor, an admixture of self-deprecation, most of it fraudulent, and sarcasm, most of that genuine. Even so, Olivia rewarded me with a bob of the head and a gentle snort. "As for the self, has it not merely replaced the soul, just as state has replaced church?" I have often had cause to regret not studying philosophy along with literature, was how I deflected that gambit, but Olivia gave no sign of offense, instead nodding once again and then responding with, That is what I would have studied. What is this wood, Olivia? You are 14 in a month's time. You have a mind that could begin such a study today. And indeed, it seems from your line of conversation, which, as I am sure you are already aware, I am ill equipped in providing you with an interlocutor, that you have, in fact, already begun. I have done so, only in the most self-serving manner. Oh? I need rationalizations, but philosophy is not about rationalizations, but rather reasons, and more than this, reason itself. Yes, precisely so, and that is why I should have made a duet of my own studies, the arts and literature for the human imagination, philosophy and the sciences for human reason. Good. That is fair, yes, the two things that set us apart from both the animals and from the gods. From the gods. This was new to me, though the other half of her tandem was of course old hat. The gods are possessed of neither. They have no imagination because they are omnipotent, and no reason because omniscient. They are thus not our opposite numbers, but rather that of the beasts, and that too makes sense if you take history after a certain time to be merely enacted mythology, for there were no human beings in those primordial days, so we are told. It now looks like, with the Neander Valley discoveries, that there might well have been some kind of human being far, far back. Olivia appeared to consider this for a moment. She had leaned way back, then dropped herself onto the remainder of the flat rock atop which we sat in closer quarters than I would have thought she would allow me to be. And yet such ages as are proposed pale into insignificance when we consider the recently known age of the earth itself. I suppose I would stand on my sense of it, even if human ancestors had been skulking about some hundreds of thousands of years ago. Now I nodded my assent. It was certainly a great, almost unimaginable breadth of time. But geological epochs were far older and longer still. Would it be the case that ensuing discoveries by the archaeologists, a department of the sciences that Philip was himself most interested in, continued to push our very own presence back into mythological time? Really, non-time would be a more apt manner of expressing such a thing, or history versus time. I could see now in my idealization of this tiny future I felt Philip and I deserved, pleasant evenings in dialogue about such things, ensconced of course in the large library, perhaps sipping at port or even brandy. It would be a way in which to ingratiate Philip to Olivia, which I also predicted would be the remaining sticking point, if any. And then I realized that for now, at least, such an evening which included Olivia could only be tolerably pleasant, and never truly so. I did finish the poetry assignment, she now announced quite unexpectedly. Good heavens, Olivia, I had given up such lessons in their sundry series, given the change of context at Ormond. Does this mean that you desire us to continue in some more formal manner? No, it does not. I imagine that we might have reasonably fulfilling discussions of an evening with your historian lover, of course, and as such I should be prepared, along with poring through grandfather's vast bibliophiles pile, to enter university in perhaps 3 years. I dare say I will have to ask of you an academic favor to that regard. I had already thought of this very thing. She would need me to vouch for her examinable qualities in order to obtain an entrance to one of the colleges. But such a process was familiar in most quarters, given that there were still extant enough families whose children were schooled in the family home and by private tutors such as myself. There had been talk of creating a licensing board for those in my position, but I had no fear of being able to myself pass any proffered examination. Olivia, by the time she herself decided to attend university, would simply vanquish such exams, just as she seemed to vanquish everything else that had been placed in her way. I maintained my composure, however, and replied, I will sign off on anything that is required, Olivia. Indeed, I feel I could do that here and now, pending the field of study you desired. You just noted that your knowledge of philosophy was sketchy. So I did. Shame on me. No matter, however, I shall still sign off. Perhaps I can catch myself up during the interim with your help. Speaking of sketching, Olivia, that was your landscape, was it not? The watercolor. It had just dawned on me that the framed work I had removed and thence replaced after the little demonstration Olivia had afforded me was unsigned for a reason. Oh, that is nothing. A recreation, that is all. A healthy one. I do try to be consistent. Now another moment that could have become another one of those moments, but it too passed, with Olivia reaching into her peacoat pocket, the same one in which she had installed her revolver, mind you, and producing a small sheaf of paper upon which some writing had been accomplished. Oh, yes, do read it to me, if you would, please, Olivia. I was going to add earlier that I completed this assignment because it was, after all, the final one you demanded before the shift in title occurred. Aha, that was reasonable, and while it may have suggested that Olivia was simply too fastidious to absolve herself upon any account, great or small, I read in her eyes another motive afoot. She recited the following to my astounded ears. Having begged my soul from life, have I thus beggared life? Having bared my soul in death, have I thus to bear such fate as comes to those who cannot live as world lives, as persons live and work and love and die, and as they do, not share their souls, nor are asked to bear them, only sell it. Yes, sell your soul, bared and born, ne'er twice born, nay, not once born, torn from life, even as I yet begged, shorn of life, ever as I yet thieved, to save oneself, one sells one's soul. This is the meaning of our time, and its soul meaning, its soul meaning, its soul's meaning lost to history, for history and time have parted, and ere on. I was stunned into silence by Olivia's words, but not only that, her voice too had altered itself. It was as if she was speaking from a great distance, and yet her person at the least had not moved any further away from me. She was but 3 feet at most from where I myself was seated. I blinked now and wondered if I should shed a tear or two in appreciation of this authentic ode. Instead, I asked to read it for myself with outstretched palm, and she gently placed it upon it. I have other copies. I thought it sounded well enough. Perhaps it is sentimental. Her voice had now returned to its normal palette of autumnal colors. But that was the voice of ages, and not mere ages past, but also somehow of those yet to come. In order to give her due credit, I read it through silently. I dared not speak it aloud, after what I had just heard. It is full of merit, if very modern. It does remind me of some of Browning's more aleatory lines, and indeed, my goodness, Olivia, he himself would applaud your gravitas of content, if not perhaps your metre. I shall take that as a compliment, then. Her face had brightened up, a most rare event, and then I thought that perhaps if I could only point her in the direction of creation, rather than that of destruction, that she would find herself as skilled within its beauty. I attempted some semblance of a feather in that flight, but I was not successful, or so I felt at the time. Creation means destruction, and vice versa. It is only how we value, that is, what value we place upon the outcomes, that discerns the merit of either. In that one might well demolish an aging toxic mill and build a modern one, or exchange a derelict house for a sheeny brownstone up and down. Indeed, yes, those would be commonplace examples of the relationship. Though there, and in like instances, I will reckon the artist in you would not think a new cotton mill or city walk-up would be particularly creative, though each required the genuine destruction of something else. Ha! Yes, that is quite the case. I would not, but I do take your principle as valid in itself. For a moment there was a new day between us. Her poem had opened a portal within which perhaps the very souls of which she spoke might commingle. This was the force of art itself, I knew, and so it might also be possible, given her painterly recreations. The watercolor I had held in my hand was well rendered, which is why I sought upon its surfaces an autograph in the first place, that Olivia should become something of an artist herself, anything other than what she was now, and I, for the life of me, did not fathom that what was in any case. I suppose we should wander back. I had a notion to play the piano tonight. Would that suit? I would take pleasure and perhaps more in hearing Beethoven. I have only heard his work the once, in London, with my parents several years ago, but he gave me hope to myself in my darkest hours. Good Lord, yes. But then I shuddered involuntarily. If some years ago had represented Olivia's darkest hours, what on earth should these past 2 months have been upheld? And what of those dark hours under the lash of my predecessor? But then I recalled that the period to which she had just alluded would have included being imprisoned in the cellar, and was it only the once it had occurred? I was so beset with a pitying compassion I had to bite my tongue not to ask after it right then and there. No, I silently remonstrated myself. You yourself deserve the lash if you cannot hold your voice at the very instant the poor girl is touching at the stars. Sarah and Hargreaves joined us in the largest parlour, wherein sat the grand instrument. I had not, in fact, played it at all since arriving, working only upon the smaller upright that sat in the music room proper. Neither daughter seemed to have the least affinity for music, but perhaps now I had been mistaken, at least with Olivia. I had thus not sought to teach them such an art at first, and of course it had been my plan to introduce it bodily during the summer months, as well as singing. This is an unexpected treat, Miss Endicott. Oh, Mr. Hargreaves, Sir Lawrence, I do declare that such an instrument as this may be out of my league by several degrees. I doubt that very much, but I have yet to note you playing upon it. I am delighted that it should be played at all, given current compliment. To this Sarah gave him a look of chagrin. She clearly had no facility with the piano, at least. Olivia ignored the manager, as she always seemed to do, and instead directed to me a list of works that had clearly been formulated in her mind as we had walked back through the gardens to the rear entrance of the house. I should very much like to hear Sonata number 17, if you would. I do believe we have the score for it in that pile over there. It is Opus 31, number 2. And if it should please you as well, number 25, the sole work in Opus 79, and unnamed. Good Lord, no easy menu, was Olivia asking. I felt I might pick my way through the both of them with enough verve to be convincing to such a tiny and no doubt not so critical audience. But I nodded to myself that I would never dare to attempt such works in public without countless hours of preparation. The Tempest. Yes, I do recall it now, a suitable opener for the darkling angel in our midst, and she was correct about the other, one of Beethoven's sonatas that did not have a moniker associated with it. I wondered idly, in the few moments required to set up the sheets and then welcome Olivia herself to my side as page-turner, what the difference was, in the great composer's mind, between those works with names and those without. I can follow it, but give me a final phrase notice with a nod, Olivia suggested in altogether gentle tones. For this she received a beautiful smile from our resident beauty, and I do not here speak of myself, though Philip for one would chastise me for such a studied omission, the Lady Miss Montford, and I nodded my body into the first movement of 17. Olivia proved to be a competent aid, and I never thus lost my place. That I struggled to lose myself in the music was understandable, but it did not seem to make an impression upon the other three. Olivia was focused in a way I had only seen in much less virtuous pursuits. No, that was not entirely fair. But Laura, you wretch, pay attention. 25 has, of course, a much sunnier disposition than the aptly named Tempest, and thus the mood of the room correspondingly was lifted. But it was manifestly unfair to the very person who needed to immerse herself in the music, and indeed had made the request, and led me to believe that this was the reason for it, to be reading through it much as I was, and in a yet more technical manner. When I eventually completed the second sonata and received the gracious applause from the others, I turned to Olivia and bade her be seated. My trusty page-turner has tasked herself with an unreasonable role, so now let me play from memory a few favorite pieces so that all of us can truly enjoy the composer's intentions. A little smattering of applause from Hargreaves and Sarah, and Olivia nodded to me with some gratitude. She was now perched upon an overstuffed ottoman, her wiry legs stretched out in front of her. She had taken to dressing in the equestrian style, with its shorter skirts and thicker breeches beneath. I had not a doubt that she would, in her own wider world, dress as did the gentleman sportsman dress, agile, adaptable, and with enough clearance for her legs to exert themselves in rather every possible situation in which she might find herself. Even her vest was snug, her arms available for, once again, a diversity of tasks, including, of course, that of turning over sheet music as required. Her hair was emblazoned with a blood-red ribbon, in almost grotesque contraposition to the brilliantly shining cobalt bow that her sister wore in hers. As I mentally prepared a short program of well-known works, I also noted that Sarah was wearing what one would think was a genuine diamond necklace, its facets strung around her perfect aquiline neck, sparkling in the candlelight, and picking out her eyes in a manner that no young man could resist. It made me snicker to myself what Philip might think of her in that sense. Diamonds for show, yes, but rather sapphires for soul windows. Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words, I announced, and then set in. About 40 minutes later, I was assuredly spent. This had been by far the longest period over which I had played for perhaps some years. I made a silent vow to rectify that, and suggested that 2 or 3 times a week I would provide entertainment for the entire household. Hargreaves was most agreeable to the proposition, but he added with a grin that I should perhaps learn a few tavern tunes to which the new staff could sing along. I shared in the mirth of this and thought I had in fact noted a few sheets of this ilk in the midst of all of the serious pieces. It was my father's mother who played as you do. Sarah had come up to me as I sat, recovering upon the bench, though now having turned my body away from the instrument. Is that so? How lovely. Did you? No, I was very little when she passed, but I do remember, a little bit, yes, I do. But now, having you here, Laura, I speak for my sister as well, when I tell you that you cannot know what it means for us. You cannot, and you shall not, and this is why your gentleman is ever welcome here as well. Well, my dearest Sarah, I cannot imagine that we shall stay over long. Mr. Rossiter, being who he is, and a man to boot, would very likely desire to establish his own household, perhaps in a few years, when he himself is established. To this Sarah looked a trifle glum. She rose to it gamely enough and asked, "So you are yourself to be a mother, then?" I had quite honestly not even given it a first thought. Before I arrived here, before I became your mentor, such as I might fulfill such a role, I was somewhat lost, Sarah. There I was, without funds, without friends. I was due to be cast out. Oh, dear, that is hyperbole. I was due to end my tenure in my little suite of rooms in town, and in just 2 days. I placed the advertisement, and your father duly responded. I was never more relieved in my life. That said, only because I had already met Philip, also a relief sourced in the most beneficent providence which may be left to us godless creatures, and yet he was so shortly to leave me. I understand, I truly do. Well, then, we must see to it that he never leaves you again, Laura. I appreciate that. Such would be my most cherished ideal. There was something odd in Sarah's bejeweled orbs at that moment. She had the bearing of a lady, the mind of a grown woman, and the character of an elder gentle lady, but her eyes had remained those of a child. I once again caught myself before plunging neck deep in the morass of imaginings. 2 years! 2 years of she adoringly looking into her father's eyes, of her cries of joy and of pleasure, and of her desires kindled and rekindled in the very manner they should never have been. And yet there was none of that now present. Her father was dead, and indeed, whether he had killed himself out of some last semblance of honor, and thus had become aware of his burden of sinful shame, or whether Sarah had herself somehow effected the fatal wound, in that moment it did not matter. One more glance at her eyes, then it all came to me. Her father did not kill himself. He would not have allowed his elder daughter, his mistress, and his lover by the gods to witness such an act. He would have sent her back through the secret aperture and waited long enough until she had regained the sanctity of her own bedchamber, at the greatest distance from his own, within the bounds of the house itself, before pulling the trigger. The door and the paneling would have thence been closed, invisible, and thus the bullet would have been found within his rooms and not within the passage. I stared across at her now, making ready to leave for bed with her sister by her side. She was beyond lovely, and I myself could say as much, since I too was a young woman who was also universally admired. No, not quite so, you vain thing. One good thing that had come about from Sir Hugh's disinterest was that it had given me some useful perspective. Ay, and this by half again. It had all fallen into place, and now all I needed to do was ascertain if Olivia did herself know the whole of it, just so everyone was of a page. Or perhaps I did not. Perhaps it was one of those things that could be left well enough alone. The Lady Miss Montfort was, after all, not the same person as had been Sarah Montfort. She had already given every impression that she would never marry, for instance, and though she had now murdered twice over, it was highly unlikely, not least given her sister's continuing and loyal presence, that she should ever have to do so again. Thank you for listening.